The auctioneer said no woman could run a cattle sale. She sold every head before noon. The Stockton Yards auction house was a long, low building, made of rough-cut timber and bad decisions, and it smelled the way every auction house smells, of cattle and dust and the particular tension of men spending money they were not sure they had. Josie Renfield had been inside it exactly once before, standing behind her husband while he sold 40 head of yearlings at a price that made him swear under his breath for a week. That had been 3 years ago. Her husband was dead now, and the 40 head had become 120, and Josie was standing in the auctioneer's office with a bill of sale and an intention that Wilbur Pratt, the auctioneer, found objectionable. "Mrs. Renfield," Pratt said, leaning back in his chair with the measured patience of a man explaining something obvious. "I have been running cattle sales at these yards for 22 years. No woman has ever called an auction here. It is not done." "I am not asking you to call the auction," Josie said. "I am telling you that I will be calling it. My cattle, my sale, my voice. The buyers will not stand for it. The buyers will stand for a good price. They do not care who names it." Pratt looked at her. She was 30, tall, with dark hair pinned tight, and a face that was handsome in the way that useful things are handsome, direct, unadorned, built for purpose. Her husband, Luther Renfield, had been one of the better cattlemen in the county before a horse threw him into a fence post and broke his neck. Since then, Josie had run the ranch alone, which the county had noticed and discussed, and mostly disapproved of, because a woman running a cattle ranch was irregular, and irregular things made people nervous. The disapproval had taken practical forms. The feed supplier in town had suggested she hire a man to handle her orders. The livestock broker had offered to manage her sales, so she would not have to worry. The banker had asked, with elaborate courtesy, whether she had considered selling the ranch to someone more suited to the work, by which he meant someone with different anatomy. Josie had declined every offer with a politeness that concealed a fury so precise it could have cut wire. "Mrs. Renfield, I am trying to protect you from embarrassment." "I am not embarrassed, Mr. Pratt. I am in possession of 120 head of prime yearlings that need selling. You may facilitate the sale, or I will take my cattle to the yards in Abilene, where they will be less particular about who speaks." Pratt facilitated. Pike Sheridan heard about it before the sale. He heard about it the way he heard about everything in cattle country, through the network of ranch hands and drovers and feedlot operators who traded information the way other men traded tobacco. A woman was going to call the auction at Stockton Yards, the Renfield widow, the one who ran her dead husband's ranch and would not sell it, and would not hire a foreman, and would not do any of the things a widow was supposed to do. Pike was 34, a cattle buyer out of Wichita, who traveled the yards from Dodge to Abilene and back, buying herds for the packing houses in Kansas City. He was good at it. He had an eye for cattle that bordered on the supernatural. He could look at a pen of yearlings and tell you their weight within 10 pounds, their age within a month, their finish within a week. He was tall and lean and weathered, with a quiet voice that carried the authority of a man who knew exactly what things were worth and did not pretend otherwise. He had been buying cattle for 12 years, starting as a drover's assistant at 22, and working his way up through feedlot management and then into buying, where his eye for quality and his refusal to overpay had made him valuable to the packing houses. He was not a man who impressed easily. He had seen too many cattle and too many cattlemen for that. But he respected craft wherever he found it, and the reports about the Renfield widow suggested craft of a high order. He came to the Stockton sale because the Renfield cattle had a reputation. Luther Renfield had bred good stock, deep-bodied, heavy-boned Herefords that finished well and traveled without shrinking, and Pike wanted to see whether the widow had maintained the quality. The yards were full by 8 in the morning. Ranchers, buyers, feedlot men, and the general population of people who attended cattle sales for the entertainment stood along the fence rails and leaned against the posts, and waited with the anticipation of a crowd expecting a spectacle. Josie Renfield walked into the ring at 8:30. She wore a split skirt and a man's vest over a white shirt, and her voice, when she spoke, carried across the yards with a clarity that silenced the murmuring. "Good morning," she said. "I have 120 head of Hereford yearlings, bred from Luther Renfield stock. raised on native grass, and ready for finishing. I will be calling this sale myself. If that troubles anyone, the gate is behind you." A murmur ran through the crowd like wind through grass. A few men exchanged glances. One rancher near the back muttered something to his neighbor that was loud enough to carry and vulgar enough to ignore. Josie ignored it. She had been ignoring that particular kind of commentary since the day Luther died, and she had gotten very good at it. No one moved toward the gate. Pike Sheridan, standing at the rail with his arms folded, felt something shift in his assessment of the morning. He had come for the cattle. He had not expected the woman calling the sale to be the most interesting thing in the yards. Josie called the auction. She called it the way she did everything, with precision, without decoration, and with a knowledge of cattle that was evident in every word she spoke. She did not use the sing-song patter of a professional auctioneer. She described each lot in plain language: weight, age, breed, condition. And she started the bidding at a price that was fair and firm, and left no room for the kind of lowball opening that buyers use to test a seller's nerve. The buyers bid. They bid because the cattle were good, and the prices were right, and because the woman calling the sale knew what she was talking about, and knowing what you are talking about is, in cattle country, the only currency that matters. Pike bid on 4 lots. He watched Josie while he bid, the way she tracked the room with her eyes, catching the subtle signals. A raised finger, a tilted hat, the barely perceptible nod that indicated a bid. She missed nothing. She managed the pace the way a good horseman manages a pace, holding back when the energy flagged, pushing forward when the bidding heated, keeping the rhythm alive without ever appearing to force it. It was, Pike thought, the most impressive display of salesmanship he had seen in 12 years of attending auctions. He got 3 of them, at prices that were slightly higher than he had planned, because Josie had a way of reading the ring that kept the bidding alive longer than it should have. By 11:30, every head was sold. Josie closed the sale, thanked the buyers, and walked out of the ring with the same straight-backed posture she had walked in with. Wilbur Pratt, who had watched the entire sale from his office window with an expression of increasing astonishment, said nothing to anyone, which was its own kind of review. Pike found her at the pen behind the yards, checking the cattle he had bought, running her hand along the back of a yearling heifer with the absent familiarity of a person who has touched 10,000 cattle and can read their condition through her fingertips. "You called a good sale," he said. Josie looked at him. She had noticed him in the ring. He was difficult to miss. The tall buyer with the quiet bids who knew exactly when to raise and when to hold. She had also noticed that he had not smirked, not whispered to the man beside him, not done any of the things that the other men had done when she first stepped into the ring. "I sold good cattle," she said. "The sale called itself." "That is not true, and you know it. You read that ring better than most auctioneers I have seen, and I have seen a great many. I grew up watching my father sell horses. The principles are the same. The principles, not the execution." She almost smiled. The almost was important. It meant she was deciding whether to let him in, and the decision had not yet been made. "Mr. Sheridan, is there something you need? Your cattle are in good condition. I stand behind every animal I sell." "I do not doubt that. I came to ask whether you have more yearlings coming in the fall. I have 60 head that will be ready by October. I would like first right of refusal." "That is not how auctions work." "I know how auctions work. I am asking for a private sale, ahead of the auction, at a price we agree on." Josie looked at him. The proposal was legitimate. Private sales between ranchers and buyers happened all the time. But there was something in the way Pike Sheridan was looking at her that suggested the cattle were not the only thing he was interested in. And Josie, who had spent 3 years building a wall between herself and the assumptions people made about widows, was not inclined to let a cattle buyer through it on the strength of a compliment and a purchase order. "Come to the ranch in September," she said. "Look at the cattle. We will discuss terms. I will be there." He was there. He rode the 60 miles from Wichita in 2 days, stopping overnight at a way station where the food was bad and the bed was worse, and neither bothered him, because he was thinking about the woman at the other end of the road. He had not stopped thinking about her since the sale. He had thought about her voice, clear and certain across the auction ring. He had thought about the way she handled the bidders, reading them the way he read cattle, instinctively, precisely, with an understanding that went deeper than technique. He had thought about the almost smile and what it would take to turn it into a real one. He came in September with a wagon and a driver, and the unhurried demeanor of a man who has traveled a long way and intends to take his time. He looked at the 60 head. He walked among them, checked their teeth, ran his hands along their backs, and confirmed what he had already suspected, that Josie Renfield raised the best cattle in the county, and that the county's refusal to acknowledge this was the county's problem. He also looked at the ranch. He saw the fences that were tight and the barn that was sound, and the house that was neat, and the operation that ran with the smooth efficiency of something managed by a person who understood every part of it. He saw the 2 hired hands who deferred to Josie with the easy respect of men who had learned that competence outranked gender. He saw the books she kept, neat columns of figures in a leather ledger that tracked every animal from birth to sale. "You run a better operation than most men in this territory," he said, standing in the barn while Josie showed him the feed schedule she had worked out, based on weight gain projections. "I run the only operation I know how to run. Whether it is better or worse than anyone else's is not my concern. It should be. It is remarkable. Remarkable or not, the cattle need feeding. Are we agreed on the price?" They agreed on the price. Pike paid and arranged shipping, and then, instead of leaving, asked if he could stay for supper. Josie considered this the way she considered all proposals, carefully, with an eye to both the immediate and the long-term implications. "Supper is stew and biscuits," she said. "Nothing remarkable." "I doubt that very much." He stayed for supper. The stew was good, and the biscuits were better, and the conversation was the best Pike had had in a year. Josie talked about cattle, the way some people talked about art, with passion and specificity, and the deep pleasure of someone who loves the thing they are good at. She talked about breeding lines and grass management, and the particular challenges of finishing cattle on native range versus cultivated pasture. Pike listened and asked questions and offered his own observations, and they argued about stocking rates and winter feeding and the relative merits of Hereford versus Shorthorn crosses. And the argument was the most stimulating exchange either of them had experienced in longer than they cared to admit. After supper, they walked to the corral and leaned against the fence and watched the cattle settle for the night. The sky was enormous, as Kansas skies are, and the stars were coming out in clusters, and the air smelled of grass and dust and the sweet warm smell of cattle that Pike associated with every good thing in his life. "This is a fine operation," he said. "It is Luther's operation. I just kept it going." "No, it is yours. Luther built the foundation. You built the house. There is a difference." Josie was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than he had heard it. "No one has ever said that to me. Everyone says I am maintaining Luther's legacy, as though I am a caretaker, not a builder." "You are a builder," Pike said. "Anyone who cannot see that is not looking." "You know a great deal about cattle," Josie said. "So do you." "I know, but you are the first man who has said so without following it with the word for a woman." Pike set down his coffee cup. "That qualification would make the statement less true, and I do not say things that are less true than they need to be." Josie looked at him across the table. The lamplight was soft and the kitchen was warm, and the man sitting across from her was looking at her with an expression that was not patronizing, not predatory, not any of the things she had learned to expect from men who found themselves alone with a woman who did not need them. It was simply respect, and underneath the respect, something warmer. "Come back in October," she said, "for the next lot." "I will come back in October." He came back in October and November, and by December he was coming to the ranch without the pretense of cattle business, riding the 60 miles from Wichita because the woman at the end of the ride was worth every mile. They were married in January by the circuit judge, in the parlor of the Renfield Ranch, with the 2 hired hands and Wilbur Pratt as witnesses. Pratt, who had said no woman could call an auction, gave a toast that began with an apology and ended with a prediction that Josie Renfield Sheridan would be running the yards within 5 years, which turned out to be optimistic by 3. The woman who had sold every head before noon built a cattle empire beside a man who had come for the stock and stayed for the woman. The yards at Stockton never questioned her again, and the buyers who had once whispered behind their hands learned what Pike Sheridan had known from the first morning, that a person who knows cattle is a person who knows cattle, and everything else is noise.